So good to see you again, Dr. Kumbu.
Good to see you, Dr. Kim.
Well,
Oh,
we're going to talk about Decision to Leave today, right?
yes,
A film that just came
please.
out. Yeah. So I hope you're ready for that.
I am ready for decision to leave.
So if I could, I'll just give you my, I'm not going to summarize the film. I think we're going to sort of see bits and pieces of it in our conversation, but I did want to give a little bit of background to
Right.
the director and his artistic approach and his artistic heritage in filmmaking. And so Park Chan-wook, that's how you would say it in Korean, his last name's first. So again, this is a cultural lesson as well too. In Korean culture, you start with the last name and then you say the first name, right? So last name, first name is how you talk about yourself and how you talk about other people. You don't or you use a lot of honorifics in Korean, right? So you could say if someone is the president of a company, it would be, if it was Director Park, it would be Park 대표님, right? Like that's, you would say his last name first, and then you'd say his title second. So it's the reverse of what we do in the West, right? So we would say President Park,
Right.
but in Korean, in the way that we use the language, we would say Park 대표님, right? Or Park 사장님. That means like a boss of a business. And so Park Chan-wook, as a director, has had a long career, successful career. By the way, he's not one of those one-hit wonders. He's had a series of successful films that have not only been successful in the box market, they've been successful critically. He's won a lot of awards, both internationally, but also in Korea. And I would say my number one favorite film of his, which is maybe some people may agree with me, but I think many people probably won't because there are so many other more famous films that he's made. But my favorite film that he's ever made is called Joint Security Area, JSA. He produced that in 2000. It is a heart-wrenching film if you are a human being of any, of any heritage, of any culture, but all the more so if you come from a nation or a background or a family or a community where there is brokenness between subgroups within that community or within your family, when it doesn't even have to be a nation, it could just be a broken relationship where you still identify with those other people, with the people that you are in broken relationship with, and yet you are separated. You are no longer one people. You are no longer one community. That brokenness is something that I think it carries through this his newest film, Decision to Leave, and that's why I mentioned that and go into it in so much detail. There is I feel like the themes of being one with others, but also being in a relationship that is broken is something that is inherent in this film as much as it is in Joint Security Area. But most people know Park Chan-wook because of his Vengeance trilogy films. The first of which was Old Boy in 2003, extremely violent, extremely visceral film, and it's in its own right a classic in Korean filmmaking. And then much later on, The Handmaiden, which I would argue is also a vengeance film, a very strongly both feminist and anti-feminist film at the same time, I would venture. But the theme of vengeance is something that Old Boy and I think Handmaiden, two of his more well-known films, carry through their storylines. So I just want to start a little bit with that sort of film history, his pedigree, what he has accomplished, and maybe some of the films that he's more well known for. And I've given away my favorite film of his, Joint Security Area. So what do you think? What did you think of the movie?
That is very fascinating because this I think I saw Oh Boy,
Mm,
the
mm.
remake,
Ah,
the other,
Spike Lee.
this Spike Lee version of it.
Yeah,
So I didn't know he'd made this,
yeah.
and I haven't seen any of his work, so this is the first time I
Mm.
am getting to see his work, and it was definitely a psychological thriller. It was definitely a psychological thriller. Um, just diving in to the movie, the thing that one of the main thing that really gripped me,
Uh,
cultural perspective, and which I brought up last time, was the food. Like in the other
mm,
movies that I've seen
mhm,
of people making
mm.
African movies, I don't think they have a good use of food. They
Yeah,
underestimate the power of food,
yeah,
the importance of food
yeah.
to a cultural community like that.
Yes, yes.
And in this movie, I think one of my favorite takeaway was the use of food. They use
Mm,
food so beautifully. They
interesting.
use food so beautifully.
Huh.
Yes, in the scene where he is at home with his wife.
Uh-huh.
Like, the film jumps. Like, there's a lot of jumping in the
That's
film,
right. That's
and
right.
the flashbacks and this, and all of a sudden you're like, is this a split screen, or what's going on here? Is this a flashback? Is this real?
Right, right,
Is he
right.
really in the room holding a cigarette thing,
Yeah,
or what's going on
yeah.
here? So
Right, right.
it plays on so many emotions,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
and for me, when I saw that food, it felt like a calming emotion,
Hmm.
because that film was all over the place.
Yeah.
And then there was dinner, there was
Ah,
meal, there was lunch, and it brought me back to earth. It brought me back to to
yeah.
to family. It brought me back to normalcy, and it told a unique story. How, like, the relationship between his wife and him,
Yeah.
and when his wife is explaining what actually keeps a relationship, from what the
Mm,
conversation she and her friend was having at work, and
mm.
what she says about what keeps a relationship. They're doing it while eating. So I take away from that movie an intense conversation that is very telling
Mm.
of what the woman values in the relationship,
Interesting.
while at the same time just enjoying a meal.
Yeah.
So they're not arguing or
Yeah.
fighting about
Yeah.
this issue. They're
Yeah.
just having dinner and talking about something that will make and break their relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Do you remember what they were eating? Do you happen to remember what type of food they were eating?
That I don't remember. But one thing I remember is that almost every scene had a uniqueness. The food was unique. For
Mm,
example,
mm,
I
mm.
don't remember that scene, what they were eating, or maybe they were prepping food. Maybe they were prepping
Okay.
food, but there was
Okay.
something to do with food, or they're
Interesting.
just sitting on the table. So
Yeah.
maybe I have to go back and watch. But that scene, for some reason, attached to food for me. The second scene attached to food, that was a different meal, was when they were in the interrogation room,
Mm,
and
mm.
he bought this high level food, and his partner complained, like, okay, is that what I'm eating? Do we have
Yeah.
the budget for that? So
Yeah.
it was very telling
Yeah.
of where his interest was starting to go.
Yeah.
And then when they're talking about food again, was the moment where he's talking about the dead body, and how the time that a dead body scares him is when the dead body is looking at him and saying, investigate or kill me, or something like that. The whole, the eye opening
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
is
Yeah. Yeah.
telling him to, and he's doing that, and then he's talking about how it lays eggs in the eyes of
Ah, yes, that's right.
body,
That's
while
right.
he's cracking eggs and
That
dropping it in the
that's
meal to
right.
cook
That's
and
right.
eat. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not eating that meal.
That's interesting. You know what's interesting about your observations, I'm so fascinated by it, is again the lens, the cultural lens by which you view the film is inherently and admittedly different from mine.
Yes.
And when I watch the film, those things are implicit. So I don't even notice the food. I don't remember anything about food at all, except for there are only two scenes, and you mentioned one of them.
Right.
The director, I saw before I watched the film, I saw an interview with him, a recorded interview, And in the interview, he talks about crossing genres, and I hope to talk about that as well too. You
Right.
know, it's a love film. It's
Right.
this romance film,
Right.
inherently romantic, not just about romance, but it's a romantic film, right?
Right.
But it's inherently a crime, murder, mystery film as well too.
Yes.
But he in his interview talked also about wanting to combine also elements of comedy and humor.
Right.
And that scene is about humor, actually. The scene about the sushi, yes, it's for when I watch it.
Oh
It's
yes, the second scene about the sushi where they bring in the sushi. This time he's mad, and you can see that there's tension in the relationship at this point. And then he's like, "Broop, no more fancy food. It's sushi you're having."
yeah,
And
yeah. Actually,
in a very
it wasn't.
unfancy wrap. Is that the
Yeah,
one?
what was interesting about that? So again, this is the cultural piece, right? So in when he's bringing her sushi, what's interesting about sushi in Korean culture is that it's not Korean food. If you
Chinese.
think about it, it's Japanese food.
Oh, it's actually Japanese. And
Yes,
Japanese Japanese were the ones that were
they colonized.
colonized.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah.
They were the colonizers of Korea
So
for
here's your
many
food,
years.
colonizer.
Yeah, well, yes. But what's interesting about that dichotomy in the minds of Koreans is that, you know, they can hate what Japan did to them as a nation, but they love Japanese culture. Koreans have a deep intimacy with Japanese culture,
Huh.
and they almost co-opt Japanese culture as their own, like parts of it, right? And that's also something that's inherent to we're talking about culture now, right? In the
Yes.
history of culture in Korea. Koreans are inherently the middlemen, the middle people, right? They're the intermediaries because they've always stood as that land boundary between the two great Asian superpowers, right? Of modern times, right? You look at China and you look at Japan as being the Asian superpowers.
Right.
And Korea is right there in the middle, right between them. And at different periods of time, those two superpowers competed for Korea. So Korea has had to play both sides. It could not afford to be on one side or the other. Now, obviously, when China had a stronger interest, it was more Chinese. When Japan had a stronger interest and through colonization, stronger power over Korea, it was more Japanese, right? And so Koreans live in this liminal space, this space of being in between cultures and almost not knowing who they are on the one hand, but at the same time, because they don't know who they are, desperately wanting to have their own identity.
Right.
Like that is something that is not unique around the world, but as a Korean American, I deal with that in a completely different context and framework. Living in America as a Korean American, I live in two spaces. I live in the Korean space and the American space. And I get asked by not only myself, I don't just, it's not an internal conversation merely. I get asked this question by my friends, my peers, by strangers, by neighbors. Who are you? Where are you from? And if I say, I'm from New York, I'm a New Yorker. I was born in New York, can't you tell, right? They invariably will ask, no, where are you really from? As if I cannot be from New York, right? So again, that speaks to, again, this dependence on skin color as a superficial but easy way of categorizing. And because I look the way I look, I must have an accent, right? I must be from somewhere else. And yeah, the Asian identity in America is so complex because Asians have been part of the fabric of the founding of this country from its earliest days. If you think about Native Americans, right? Native Americans, when you look at them genetically, a lot of the 23andMe, the ancestry, all of those genetic tests, they will group different sort of genetic groups around the world together. One obviously is European, African, and then Asian. And what's interesting is Asian and indigenous Native Americans are grouped together.
Wow.
Genetically, they're grouped together, and then you break them down further, but their larger group is Asian/indigenous Americans,
Mm. And I
which
can,
is really telling. Asians were the very first original people in America. You
that is
know,
quite interesting. Wow.
yeah. I mean,
And
when you think about it that way.
when you look at, even when you look at the body structures, and the fact
Mhm.
that even when Columbus made his mistake, he thought
Mhm.
he can mistake them for Indians, and Indians are Asians, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
um yeah, so I can totally see that. And I want to go back to something you said before I forget, is that Korean identity.
Mm.
So as I was going through this movie, I had to sit back and say, what is Korean culture?
Mm.
You
Yeah,
know, I
yeah,
while working on the article mentioned the last time, I I was looking at homogeneous cultures.
yeah,
So a country like Kenya is more heterogeneous than anything
yeah,
culturally.
yeah.
But the country that had the most homogeneity was Korea, South Korea.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, and I was blown away. And even looking at this movie, it made me wonder,
Mm. Mm.
what is the Korean culture? And
Yeah,
you bringing up the food
yeah,
really drives that point to me now,
yeah,
because
yeah,
it says you're conflicted. You're
yeah,
conflicted because of China and Japan.
yeah,
You're conflicted, so you don't truly know your identity. You don't
yeah,
truly know your culture, and it's hard for anybody to say, okay, this is Korean culture.
yeah,
I can easily tell you that is this or this is
yeah.
Chinese,
Right.
that is Japanese,
Yeah, yeah.
but I cannot tell you what is Korean.
That's right. That's right.
It doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
That's
It
right.
just means that because of colonization,
Yeah,
because of the fractured identities that you have,
yeah.
now you are living in a world where you're constantly trying to figure out who you are,
That's
and
right.
you're mimicking this person because you really like them, you like their sushi, you're mimicking. Now you're
Right.
taking that and trying to
That's right.
make that part of your identity. So I can
Yeah.
totally see your struggle. So
Yeah,
it's not the struggle now has, you're second generation
that's
American.
right.
And
Yeah,
the struggle even is worse,
yeah.
because if you were Chinese and somebody say that, you would have been like, oh, this is my culture as a Chinese person.
Mm.
This is my culture as a Japanese
Yeah,
person.
yeah,
But when they ask you, where are you really from?
yeah,
You can't just be like, oh, my parents are from Korea and this is our culture.
yeah,
What is it?
yeah,
And I did see that in the film, because I looked at the film and I was like, okay, I see the beautiful use of food. I see the thing that I noticed is the politeness. Politeness is a very common
that's right.
Japanese,
That's
Chinese
right.
culture. So
That's right.
it crosses over.
Yeah,
It's not unique to you.
yeah,
So when I looked at this film, I was like, okay, great. This is a wonderful, unique film.
yeah,
There's sometimes that I was like, oh, this is slow.
yeah.
But when you look at how the film is done, it's still really good. Even the
Yeah.
slowness of the film adds to the
Oh,
emotional
yes.
triggers
Absolutely.
that is going
Absolutely.
through your brain. But I
Absolutely.
asked the question in general, what makes this a Korean film?
You know, that is such a great, and it's such a great question. And I think this discussion about food really gets at that.
Right.
So to, we took a couple of tangents here. So to go back to the original scene with the sushi, right? So again,
Yes.
sushi, I don't see, again, this is really difficult. I have to admit, this is very difficult for me because I don't identify as Korean. I really
Right.
don't. Not as a pure Korean. Like I did not grow up there. I don't have Korean education. I don't have a Korean upbringing. I
Right.
don't have like my closest friends are not in Korea, right? They didn't grow up, they didn't, my closest friends don't live in Korea. My closest family I have aren't in Korea either. I have family there, I have relatives there, but most of my family immigrated to the US,
Right.
including my cousins and uncles and aunts. And so Korea for me it's almost like a fairy tale. Like it's something that you read about and something you hear about. Now,
Right.
obviously, I've gone back to Korea many, many times.
Mhm.
And so I've reinvested in my heritage and I've learned more about it, but I am both an insider and an outsider at the same time. And I will never be completely accepted by Korea. They will never accept me completely. Number one, I don't understand them. Their values are not mine. Their culture is not mine. Their language is not mine. I speak Korean. I'm fluent in it, but I don't speak the same way that someone who grew up in Korea and went to college there. And if I did a doctorate there, even more so, I don't speak like they do. I can't. It's impossible for me.
Right.
I don't get all of their jokes. I don't get their nuances.
Right.
I don't use very elegant language. I don't use very complicated figures of speech, for example. The things that I can say are things that I heard growing up. So I speak probably at like an elementary school level or middle school level for most people.
Mhm.
So there is that, and I think that's part of what the film does as well too. But again, I'm leaving the topic of food. Let me get back to the food issue.
Which is good because that's all culture, right? And
Right.
the language,
Yeah.
language is something that I picked up. I said,
Yeah.
okay, you can point to language as this is Korean
That's
because
right.
of the language.
That's right.
Go ahead.
So
Sorry.
so I have to first of all admit that I cannot speak for all Koreans. So when I'm saying something about the food there, it's from my particular perspective as both being Korean and not Korean at the same time.
Mhm.
So when I look at the presentation of sushi, which is probably one of the most expensive foods in the world, right? And they make a point of talking about that particular sushi restaurant and that particular dish, that particular order as being an extremely extravagant order, right? Like that's not something that you would normally buy for someone, right? I think earlier in the film, I may be confusing this with another film. I think the wife asked the husband, "Hey, we should go get some sushi."
Mhm.
And he said something about, "Oh, no, let's just eat at home or something." You
It's
remember that?
possible.
Yeah,
It's possible.
there was
Maybe
a
that's
scene
where
like
I
that.
get the idea of food from.
Yeah, there was a scene like that, but then he brings that same sushi, and not just any sushi, the most expensive sushi from the most expensive restaurant as a takeout, which is really weird for, as someone who loves cuisine, to do. I mean, it's like going to like a Michelin starred restaurant and asking them, can I have an order to go? Right? Like you don't do
Yeah,
that, right?
I do not.
If you're gonna pay that much, you need to have the full
Yeah.
experience, right?
Yes.
But here he is taking a to-go order of the most expensive sushi restaurant, again, a foreign restaurant, colonizer's culture, and
Yeah.
you're bringing that into a prison. You're bringing that into a jail. You're bringing that into an interrogation room of all places and giving it to a criminal, a suspect, right?
Yes.
And here it's Japanese, Korean context, Japanese food, Korean context, high-level Japanese food, Korean context. Korean context is the lowest Korean context, the prison, right? It's the jail, the interrogation
Yes.
room. But you're giving it to someone who's Chinese. So you've got Japanese, Korean, Chinese, that triangle, it's represented there in that scene. And
Right.
for me, it's just such a interesting juxtaposition of contrasts, of
Right.
opposites, right? And it's comedic. For me, it's very comedic. And I think it was meant, the director talked about it being comedic. And the contrast of that scene to later when you said, like, he was falling in love with her at that stage. And then when he falls out of love for her because he's disgusted with her, right? As a criminal, then and by the betrayal, right? Then
Right.
he throws down this, and I don't know if you noticed, it's a little tiny paper tray, right? And I don't know if you know what was in it. It's actually not sushi.
Oh, what was in it?
It's a corn dog.
No.
Yes, it's a corn dog. And so you see the contrast there now, right? You see why it's humorous. When I saw it, I laughed out loud.
Hilarious.
Yeah,
I
very few people
did
laugh in
smile
the
at that scene. I
yeah,
did laugh when
yeah.
he brought, but I was like, "Ooh,
But it's a
romance."
corn dog.
I did
But
not know it was a corn dog.
but here's the thing though. That corn dog is culturally Korean.
Oh,
Yeah. So
wow.
when I was growing up in Korea, not growing up in Korea, when I visited Korea, I
Korean,
spent,
yes,
when I
yes.
was small, I spent maybe 1 or 2 months there at a time, just with my grandparents, My parents took us back for trips. And when I was with my grandmother, the easiest thing for her to make us was corn dogs. So she'd take that hot dog,
Oh,
put it on the end of a chopstick, and just, put it in batter and just dip it in the hot oil. And
right.
that would be lunch for us, just put some ketchup on it and that would be lunch for us. So corn
Oh,
dogs are very culturally Korean, but they're culturally Korean because they've been imported. So once again, it's that intermediary space that Koreans fill and
right.
sort of the hybrid identity of Koreans, right?
Oh,
So they took something that was American. So Americans brought that over during the war, right? So during the Korean War, the American soldiers went over and fought, and
right.
they brought over with them spam. So some things that are very popular in Korea right now:
Right.
spam,
Wow.
corn dogs,
Uh-huh.
those kinds of things have become popularized because of the what happened in the 1950s.
Right.
And then the continued sort of, some people call it an occupation, but some people just call it, the militarization of Korea.
Right.
And that's what JSA, Joint Security, the Joint Security Area film that Park Chan-wook also produced. That's what that speaks to, that demilitarized zone in Korea. But again, that is a remnant of the American military presence in Korea.
Right.
And so that again is that integration of cultures. So is it Korean? Yes, it's Korean now because everyone understands what it means. But it's not Korean because it didn't come. I mean, we can't trace it back centuries to Korea. But the
Right.
question that I would pose to someone who would say it's not, corn dogs are not Korean, would be, then what food actually is from any country, right?
Right.
So if you look at, for example, Italian food, it has been well documented that Marco Polo brought back food from China
Mhm,
and brought it back to Italy,
mhm.
right? And so the pasta, the noodles that you see in Italy are most likely from China.
Right.
Marco Polo bringing that back. And
Right.
now you think Italian food and you think pasta, right? And then you think about even like marinara sauce.
Mhm,
Tomatoes are from North America. They're
mhm.
not from Europe. The
Right.
tomatoes didn't exist back then. So what is marinara sauce? What is a pizza without pizza sauce? What is
Yes.
spaghetti without marinara sauce, right? So what we think about as Italian food is not Italian food. It's
Wow.
imported. It's all
Right.
imported. So all cultures around the world that have had some level of globalization
Mhm.
have witnessed a influx of cultural influences that they've now owned for themselves and have now said, this is ours, this belongs to
Yes.
us.
I love that. I really
Yeah,
love that because it's like they say culture is constantly changing.
yeah,
Culture is constantly
yeah,
evolving. So you can't say that this is this and then it will be like this forever because there is that travel, like you're
yeah.
saying. One thing that I saw in I noted in Kenya that points to that is modesty. Like we're talking about modesty here in
Mhm,
this film, when the girl walks in to take the picture with the
mhm,
camera and finds
mhm.
that he's already taking it with his phone, and
Yeah,
she's like, and she walks out. That whole politeness, don't do that. Why are you looking up her leg? Like
right,
in
right.
Kenya, there was this whole thing where you have to, or most African countries are doing it now. The girl has to have their clothes past their knees. So
Oh,
it's a sign of modesty, it's a sign of respect to
interesting.
cover past your knees.
Huh.
But the interesting thing about that is an imported culture.
That's
They get really worked up if these girls are not covered up like that. But
interesting.
that's imported culture
Mhm.
because we're on a hot continent.
That's
And for and I when I go to the farm, I never put anything that will cover my knees because I need air. I'm not gonna be
that's
working under that heat
that's
with
right.
long sleeves. No,
Right,
it's
that's
too
right.
hot.
That's
So
right.
it's like there's just so many things that I'm like, okay, it's Catholicism,
Yeah,
it's Christianity that
yeah,
came over with this, and all of a sudden Africans are now starting to wear all these long things that cover every part
yeah.
of their bodies in this hot heat. Meanwhile, it's not really true. So it made me laugh when I saw that in Kenya, and I was like, wow, culture really changes.
That's right.
Now these
That's
people
right.
are like so worked up, like you're disrespecting my culture if you show up here with something that is above your knees.
Interesting. Wow.
Meanwhile, for generations, I don't think that was the case.
No, obviously not.
It's
No.
obviously not the case, but it has been adopted and changed. Now they
That's
swear by it.
interesting. That's interesting. So, I mean, this sort of syncretism, cultural syncretism occurs, I think, again, with any society that's even
Yes.
nominally globalized, that has some type of international interaction. But I think that when you ask, what is Korean culture? I would say that's what it is, though. It's
Mm,
this hyper integration. It's not just integration, it's hyper integration. It's this willingness to accept and make their own elements of other cultures,
mhm,
right? It's this ability to stand in the middle, in the gap between West and East, between China and Japan. It's the ability to stand there with your arms stretched out to both sides and to
mhm,
say that I'm comfortable in all of those spaces, and all of those spaces are part of my space as well too, so that it's not just here's Japan on one side and here's China on the other side and Korea's in the middle, but rather it's more like this, where you have Japanese culture and you have Chinese culture, and then you have American culture and you have other cultures that occupy that space and that are invited into the space.
right.
And I think that
Melting
the
pot.
film, yeah, and I think the film does a really good job of doing that integration in terms of genre. So again, this is a, you hear of rom-coms, right? Romantic comedies. This would
Mhm.
be like a rom-crime, right?
That's
But he,
true.
but he also integrates, like I said, humor in the scenes with the food, in the
Right,
jail cell, in the interrogation room. That
right.
really is a humorous moment because just his act of bringing her the most expensive food you could find in Korea, and then bringing her like a cheap date, like that would be like the cheapest thing you'd take your date on, right? Is a corn dog, right? It's
McDonald's.
like it's like street food, right? It's like
Yeah,
$2, $3, as opposed to like $100. Like that sushi must have been at least $100 per dish,
right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what
That's
it was.
why his colleague was like,
They were
"You have
shocked,
a budget
right?
for
They were shocked. Yeah,
that."
literally shocked, right? But
No,
Koreans,
yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
I
I was going to point out another comedic scene. Something that I found
yeah.
comedic was when he tied one of his colleagues on the I don't, it's not a leash, on the rope, and they started climbing up that steep hill where the guy has fallen from.
Oh
I
yeah,
could
yeah,
not
yeah.
help but laugh at that scene.
Yeah, that
Like,
was funny. Yeah.
seriously, you really gotta climb up with your friends screaming and kicking. And then he's so polite that he can't just be like, I'm not doing it. He's
Yeah,
just going
yeah,
along with
yeah,
it. It's so funny.
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
sorry. I go ahead with your thought if you still remember.
No, no, but I mean, it's some people have talked about this film as being similar to Hitchcock's Vertigo. Again, that's a movie where you have a detective falling in love with the murder suspect. Another film would be like more modern, would be like Basic Instinct, with
Mhm.
Sharon Stone and Michael Douglas. The complexity of that relationship of a detective falling in love with a suspect, and then you wondering throughout the film, is the suspect a murderer or is the suspect not a murderer, and
Right.
that final scene, when they're in bed together, that final scene with the ice pick, that's like it's shocking, but it drives the point home, right? That
Right.
there's a deep complexity to those types of stories that cross genres like that.
And then speaking of that whole, are you the suspect or not the suspect?
Yeah.
It's in our last conversation we talked about the labels, the docility of a woman or the
Mhm.
femininity of a woman, and how that
Mhm.
reflects differently for different culture, and
Yeah.
how I personally I think it's different. The way the docility of a woman is portrayed in the West is different in how it's portrayed on the African continent.
Mhm.
But even though it's changing with Christianity, it's changing. Um, but when he narrated, or when he kind of like summarized the whole situation when they meet again the second time, and he summarized the situation and said, coincidence? What did she say? She said, No, people will not say coincidence. People will say poor woman. And I
Uh,
was just like, oh, she
mm,
is working it. She is working it. She's just milking this guy's emotions and playing the victim and all of that. Because
uh-huh.
I think by the death of the second husband, or the third husband at this point, it's you can start to feel that you start to think, okay, she definitely has a hand in all of this. And for her to just play the whole, oh, poor woman. No, you're not a poor woman.
Yeah.
Like that stood out to me. Like, wow, she's really
Yeah.
doing this poor woman thing. And
Yeah.
he's just soaking it in too.
Yeah. There was that one scene where they're looking at each other and he's yelling at her and he says, because he feels betrayed, right? And he says, "Do I seem that easy to you?" And then she yells back, "Do I seem that evil to you?" You
Oh
know? Yeah.
my.
And I think that really, yeah, it shows that dichotomy between, again, this is cultural again, right? How the Koreans view themselves, right? Koreans see themselves largely as the victim of on the world stage, right? So you look at
Ah,
their history, right? Koreans have never conquered any other country,
sure.
right?
Not that
But
I know.
they have been conquered many, many times, right? They have been oppressed throughout,
Mhm.
throughout the millennia. And so they've had to live with this tension of being victims, right? And seeing themselves as victims.
Mhm.
And you see again the woman. I didn't. What I didn't take away from it was sort of a disdain for feminism. I didn't see it as a critique of feminism. I didn't see it as being a man versus a woman thing.
No,
What I saw it was is, I mean, it's definitely a difference in who they were as people. But I
right.
think that because she was Chinese, I can't help but make that connection that, again, Koreans see everyone else as the oppressor then, right? Because if they are the victim, if they are perpetually victims, then there must always be oppressors, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so when you look at that relationship, again, the Korean man or the Korean is the victim and the Chinese woman is the oppressor, right? She's the one that's abusing the trust, abusing the relationship and manipulating and in control, right? Whereas the man feels like the Korean is being strung around. He's just being led and he
Yeah,
can't help himself,
yeah.
right? But he doesn't want to be.
Yeah.
And that's his
He doesn't
tension.
want to help himself.
He doesn't. No, he doesn't want to be the victim, right? And so
Oh,
that's
you
why
think?
he
Well,
is
in his
so angry. He's
yes, he
so
does not want
angry.
to be the victim, but he cannot help himself.
He cannot help himself, and he almost sees that as being his destiny, his fate, right?
Mm,
And I think that it's part of the angst in Korean identity as well too.
right.
Some people say that the openness of Korea is one of the most Christianized countries in the world.
Oh, wow.
It is about 60% Christian.
Okay.
Yeah, about 30% Buddhist, about 30% Protestant, 30% Catholic, 30% Buddhist. And according to some statistics. And
Statistics.
people chase back, and Korea has the largest church in the world right now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Yoido Full Gospel Church in
Uh-huh.
Seoul has had a membership of over 1 million people. Yes, active members, right? Not just on paper, but active members. 1 million people in that. Yes.
Oh,
And they're now around 600,000. So they've shrunk because the former founder, he passed away.
right.
Um, but it still remains the largest church in the world today. And so people have tried to trace back in history what made Koreans particularly open to the gospel, what made them open to Christianity. And some of the theory out there points to this victimhood, right? This concept of the self as being one in which sacrifice is necessary and where suffering is necessary. And so they looked at the
Oh,
sacrifice of Christ and they looked at the suffering Christ as a hero, right? As someone that they can identify with. And
mhm.
so when you look at sociological theories about Korea and their acceptance of Christianity, and the promulgation of Christianity in Korea, that's something that they look at culturally. Korean culture has something called Han. There's this concept of Han. If you're not Korean, it's very difficult to understand what it means because there's no direct translation for the word. But the word Han is related to suffering. It's related to depression. It's related to victimhood. It's related to helplessness. It's related to tragedy. And this
Right.
and Korean identity is formed around this concept of Han. It's a central principle in Korean
Right.
culture. So you're asking me again, what is Korean culture? Like, I don't understand. What is it? Number one, it's integrationist. It's a hybrid culture.
Right.
It's a culture that invites other cultures and makes it their own. But it's not just like they're not trying to be American. They're not trying to be Japanese. They're not trying to be Korean or Chinese. They're trying to bring in these elements and then create their own version of it or create their own sense of it and create their own exploration and imagination around it and make it their own, right? So the corn dog in Korea today, if you go there, it's not the corn batter anymore. So if you go to Korea, you can even see some restaurants in the US now, they're very popular. You see lines out the door. They're corn dog restaurants, Korean corn dog restaurants. And the Korean corn dogs now, they're made out of rice. The outside is rice. So you see how it's very
Yeah.
Korean, right? The corn
Adapt.
dog, the sauce,
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen it. The inside is a sausage. It's like any other sausage. It's a hot dog, but the outside is rice or it's like potato. Like they have potato coating around it, right? And so what's interesting is that again, they've taken something that was you could identify it as being Western, but they've made it their own and they've invented something new out of it. So it's no longer something that's Western. It is authentically Korean now.
Yes.
Right?
And I love that because it's like when I the two models that I created was basically that the transfer and adoption of universal principles. So it's like they've taken a principle that is American and they have adopted it and then they have kind of like modified it and made it their own.
Yeah.
So it's either they transfer it, the American transferred it, they adopted it, and they just made it their own, or they culturally augmented it so that it becomes their own.
That's right. So that's something that is inherently culturally Korean. So when you're asking what is Korea, that's something like if you look at their major industries, right?
Right.
Like their major industries are like if you look at K-pop, right?
Yes.
You look at like that's not traditionally Korean, right? Not at all. Oh yeah, right. And also, if you look at a lot of the K-pop, they do a lot of rap. Like in a lot of the groups, like the guy groups or the girl groups, there's one member that's always the rapper, right? Like they were brought into the group because they're the rapper, right? And so
it reminds me, is that like I think it reflects the scene in one of my favorite scene in the Black Panther movie. Is that scene in Korea and Korean pop in it, like it's beautiful.
Yeah, but I mean, you look at K-pop now and it's one of the most popular genres of music around the world. But they've taken rap, which is originally African, and they've made it their own. Like no one's gonna argue that's not yours, don't do it anymore, right?
They made it their own.
It's not the same. It's not the same as, like American rap or gangster rap or whatever you want to call it. It's not the same, but they've taken elements of it and they've made it their own.
Correct.
And same thing with their dance, right? The K-pop dancing and all that.
Yeah.
It's not traditional Korean dancing at all. But they've taken other cultures, dance medium, their artistry, and they've made it their own and they perfected it to where now people think about K-pop as being they are the best dancers in the world now.
Right.
I mean, really, you watch them dance and it's amazing. It really is amazing.
They when I watch like the reels on Instagram and I see even the way they move to the African music, on point. It is so much better, and you're like, wow, how did they do that? It's like seeing all the things that they've integrated and the body movement, and it's like, and because they're built differently than Africans, when they move to African music and they move so well. It's completely different style.
Yeah.
Because their bodies, their body is structured.
That's right.
It's just amazing.
Yeah, it's like an out of body experience, I think, for you to see
Yes.
that. Like, that's like they're dancing to my culture, but it's different. Like, it's their own, you know. And so I think that, again, that's one element, if we want to put that sort of in one bucket here, right?
Yes.
The other
I
bucket
agree.
is this concept of han, right, which is suffering.
Mhm,
And that is something that the film deals with very intimately.
mhm,
So if you look at the film, if you look at this, there are dichotomies, right? Han is about dichotomies, right? It's like living in conflict,
mhm,
right? It's the acceptance of pain as part of life,
mhm.
but trying to find hope as well too. So when you look at films like I mentioned, Old Boy, right? His earlier film, Old Boy, it's this whole concept of him living in pain, right? He was, the protagonist of the film, he's been captured and he's been tortured and he's been put inside this, basically a jail cell. It's a hotel room, but he's been locked in there for like 30 years. His life has been robbed
Yeah.
of him, right? And he's living like a prisoner, but then he escapes and he takes vengeance, right? So that is almost like the Korean wish fulfilled, right? Like, Koreans have this wish fulfillment. They dream about, and I think film is one way they do this, is they dream about what would it look like if I didn't have to be polite to people anymore.
Right.
What
That
would it,
politeness.
yeah, what would it look like if I could actually take revenge on the Japanese for everything that they did to us? What would that look like, right? What would it look like if I could say and do whatever I want to the Americans who are living on our soil, who's saying that they're protecting us, but every once in a while there's, always in the news, there's a US soldier who rapes a young Korean girl, or something happens in Korea where there's this internal conflict between so-called allies, and what do you do with that, right? And what is the wish fulfillment there, right? And I think Koreans live in this place of unfulfilled desire, but they dream about it. They dream about it, and the dream is fulfilled in these films, right?
Right. Even
But
the sex scene.
yeah,
It's yeah.
but this film is not about that.
Right.
This film is not about wish fulfillment. This film is about not being able to consummate, right? Having social barriers, having political barriers, having legal barriers, even, right? The detective and murder, right?
Yeah.
Having relational barriers, like having like things that moral barriers, right? Like, I'm already married to someone.
Yeah.
Like, why am I feeling this? Why I can't do this, right? And so you see him having this, like, he's trying to fulfill his desires, but he can't. And so he does it by buying her expensive sushi. He does it by burying evidence, right? He does it by doing all of these things.
Or sitting in front of her door for watching
And
her for
imagining himself,
hours.
like you said, he has that out of body experience where he's in her house with her, right?
Yes,
Like breathing her breath with her,
yes, it's
And
mind blowing.
it is, but that is, you see, that's the wishful, that's the Han. The Han is, I can never have that. I have to live in this compromised life. I have to live feeling like I cannot be myself completely, ever, because of what is morally expected, societally expected, culturally expected, politically expected, legally expected, and also existentially expected of myself, because that is who I am as my identity. Like,
Wow.
I have to be that. I have to be the victim. I have to be the oppressed. I have to suffer. If I don't suffer, I'm not living a full Korean life.
That's deep.
Yeah.
That's really, really deep. And
Yeah.
it takes me to the African continent.
Mm.
I think it's a little bit similar to what we will call in Pidgin bad luck. Like it's like bad luck, but it has more meaning than bad luck. They just say bad luck. It's like no matter what you do, you end up just being the victim. No matter how hard you try, these things just hold you down from every level. So it's basically describing that. And or in my tribe, they'll say ndoy, ndoy, like ndoy, ndoy is following you. Like everything is like you said, those are the words that in the dialect you cannot translate. It doesn't have its full meaning unless the person knows the culture, but
Yeah.
I can pick up what you're saying and how you're describing it and relating it to
Yeah.
what I would call it in the. So when you think about Han, it's like saying that the Africans are always poor, no matter what we're doing. We're the richest continent for resources and everything,
That's right.
but for some reason, we're always the ones
Yeah.
not waiting for hand-me-downs.
Yeah.
You work. For some reason, you can't come out of it. Why is that? Like, it's almost like that, Han.
It's fatalistic, right?
Yes.
It's an external locus of control. And so again, a lot of modern Korean films break from that, right? So when you look at Old Boy, right, that is a break from that because he doesn't stay in the room, right? He doesn't stay trapped in there. He actually goes out and starts killing people that hurt him, right? And that is not that's not a Korean thing to do. You don't see Koreans going around and murdering people because they hurt them, right? So
it's not polite.
No. And you look at even Korean Americans in America, right? If people oppress Korean Americans, if they hurt Korean Americans, you don't see Korean Americans going out and taking revenge.
I have never heard of it. I've heard of Japanese gangs and Chinese gangs. I've never heard of Korean gangs.
Yeah, you just don't hear about it, right? Because we are the perpetual victim, and that is our place in the world. And so again, when you look at the film, it is actually a very traditional film, culturally. Like genre and some of the elements that they used in the film, very avant-garde, very, very contemporary. But the cultural presentation is extremely traditional in that sense, right? And so if we could, maybe, is it okay if we give a spoiler of the film away? Is that okay to talk about the end of the film?
I have to talk about the end of the film. We have to, because the end of the film is what carried the movie for me.
Yes,
Like
absolutely.
we should talk about it. Like I know I had a criticism once for holding back. You're like, no, people know that when they start listening to this, they're gonna get some spoilers. So if somebody doesn't want it, they can stop here, watch the movie, and then come back.
Okay. So you know that the film is called Decision to Leave.
Yes.
And when I heard the title of the film and I watched the film, I was expecting that to be either he is going to leave his wife or he is going to leave the woman, right? Either one of those two were the possible outcomes in my mind.
Right.
But that's not what the film was about. That's not what Decision to Leave is about.
See, now that you're talking about it, it's starting to prick my different thoughts on what is it. But before coming into this conversation with you, I was asking myself, why did they name it Decision to Leave? And I keep running through my brain. I'm like, what is the scene? But now I can see like 3 or 4 scenes that could signify Decision to Leave. Please tell me. Coming in, I did not have a reason why it was named that. Why do you think it was called Decision to Leave? What's the reason?
Well, before I get to it, that's sort of the punchline of it, right? I'm curious to see what your perspective on that final scene is, though, the final last 5-10 minutes.
Okay, so sitting through the whole movie and those really slow moments, and then the difficulty of concentrating and reading reading the subtitles. I am a slow reader, so that was a bit challenging. So I needed to be extremely focused, extremely reflective of the scenes, and watch body language, watch everything else, so that when I missed something in the subtitle, just the storyline itself could tell me some of what was going on. And it came to a point where I just sat back and I'm like, oh, this movie's a bit slow. And then it picked up. In the end, I was sitting like, wait, what? In the end, I was blown away. That's why for me, it's not just a crime movie. It's almost like a psychological thriller, because it's like, are you kidding me? You're going to really do this to this man? You are mean. You are wicked. I cannot believe you did this to him. Like, you are just not fake. And I am still upset. Upset.
So what makes you so upset about what makes you so upset? Why are you so upset?
Okay, because throughout this journey with the food, with the investment that this guy is putting into
Mhm.
this woman, even though he is starting to know that this woman is a criminal, and lets him get away with it, destroy evidence. His wife leaves him. All of these things. And then in the end, the woman is gonna just bury herself while the guy struggles in the storm, don't care about the emotion that that guy had, not no feelings at all. She took pleasure in tormenting this guy by dying. Who does that? Who does that? I'm like, he's like, I'm gonna die. You're not gonna find my corpse. You're gonna be in love with me forever. You're gonna seek me out forever. I'm gonna leave you in pain. So maybe that's where the decision to leave comes from, because wow, that woman was vicious. That is like amour fatal. They say in French, amour fatal. That's like deadly love for the guy. That guy is like,
Wow.
oh, I
Wow.
was, yeah, when you asked me when we talked the other day, and I was like, you really want to know? I was like, I cannot talk about it now. I'm so
That's a
oh
fantastic response. I love
no.
that response. And the reason why, I'm going to tell you, the reason why I love that response is it's actually the opposite response that I had.
Seriously.
Yes, yes,
Oh my
absolutely.
goodness.
Yes. So,
Wow.
so for me, okay, and again, we got to frame it in the context of the Korean principle of Han, right?
Right, right.
That even in love, there should be suffering, right?
Wow.
You
Even
see what
when
I'm
they're
saying?
losing completely in
You see what I'm
love.
saying? So even
Oh,
in the truest and most perfect love that you can have with another person, if there
yes.
is no pain, then it is not true love,
Wow.
right? And
That is
there needs to be a
brilliant.
sacrifice. There needs to be a sacrifice. And that sacrifice cannot be just, I am going to do something for you for this one moment.
Yeah.
It's, I'm willing to do this for the rest of my life, or to give up my life
Yes.
for this love. Like that's the level that you have to go for this to be true. That suffering and pain needs to be that level. And the gift that you give to the other person is also pain and suffering.
Oh, she gave a really good big
I
one.
I am blowing your mind, aren't I? But this
It's so
this
tricky.
for the Korean viewer, and for this Korean viewer, let's just talk about myself,
Yes.
because I can't
Yes.
speak all Koreans, but for this
Yeah.
Korean viewer, when I'm looking at this film from a cultural lens,
Right.
what I see is that this is the noblest love that could have emerged from this film. Not the most vicious, the most noblest.
And I can understand that.
Because,
That's the odd thing. I can actually
yeah,
understand what you're
now that
saying.
we've had this conversation, it makes sense, right?
Yes.
Because you notice they never consummated their love. They never
No.
slept together.
Mm,
They never did.
mm.
I mean, you think about this, all that they had to go through to get to this point, and they didn't even get to be with each other intimately. And what does she do at the very end? You know, here's the thing. The reason why it's a gift too is because if she were to live, remember what he tells her. He tells her, ever since I fell in love with you, I have lost
Yes.
myself.
Right.
Like, I
Yeah.
don't know who I am, the ethical, upright, law-abiding detective, but I can no longer be that hero anymore,
Yes.
because I've done something that goes against everything I believe in
Right.
for this love. And so she recognizes that.
Yep.
And she says, I am going to give that back to you, because you will never put me in jail.
Right.
You will give up everything and love me instead of being your fullest self, your ethical self. So I'm going to give that back to you in a way that this is the only way,
Yeah.
right? Number one, you cannot physically ever have me.
Right.
I need to disappear physically from your world.
Right.
forever.
Right.
But my gift to you does not come without the pain, right? It's the gift that
Yes.
frees him. He's now free to be ethical again, right? But the gift also, again, Han means even in your joy, you have to have pain,
Pain.
right? And so even in this gift of love, you have to have the pain of not knowing what happened to me. And as a
Yeah.
detective, that is the worst kind of pain,
That
because
is
he's the type that would always pursue the case until he solved it.
Yes, because in the
So,
storm, he
yeah,
just kept going and
yeah,
going. I'm like,
yep.
are you
And
dying in the
that's
storm?
the rest of his life now. The rest of his life
Yes,
is he can be an ethical person. He can be his whole self, but he has to carry the pain of not knowing. He has to carry the pain of remembering and searching for her for the
yeah,
rest of, because
of
he
his
really
life.
doesn't know. She might have just disappeared somewhere and is
Yeah,
hiding somewhere.
yeah,
He has to carry that. He's going to see her. He's going to see her in the crowd. He's going to imagine that she's there, but she's
yep.
not there for the rest of his life. That's the pain, but that's also the gift of love.
That is true.
You will
That
love
is
me for you will love me for the rest of your life,
yeah.
passionately, without abandon, but in pain, in that
In
complete pain.
pain, in pain, without the pleasures that come with this love.
Yes, but it
Wow.
will be a true love. It'll see, that's the thing. It is a true love. It's the noblest of loves again, as
Yeah,
opposed to a vengeance love, a love
joy.
that enacts itself as vengeance or violence against someone.
Right. Wow. And when you put it that way, like it blows, and my philosophy of hand that I was
Mm.
thinking, connecting to my
Yeah,
tribe, it blows it a bit out of the window. But it also reminds me of the love of a mother that would sacrifice
that's
everything
right.
to make sure that the child has
That's right.
everything they need. And yes, they have the pain of not accomplishing their dream, but they have the joy of knowing that they give love to their kid. So it's
Yeah,
in a small way,
that's right.
I can connect that to
That's
my
right.
culture, but at the same time, it really brings a complete different love, because society today, when you look at people today, a little argument in the relationship, let's break up. A little this,
That's right.
let's break up.
That's right.
So love
That's right.
has been reduced to a bunch of butterfly feelings and a
Mm,
bunch of convenience,
yeah,
that
yeah,
people no longer put the work
that's right.
in a
That's
relationship, in making romance what romance is actually supposed to be.
mhm.
Because you see a really deep romance in a situation where the people have never actually consummated
That's right.
the relationship, but there is undeniable love
Yeah,
and deep connection and romance between those two people.
yeah,
Undeniable, undeniable. And I
yeah,
think to a certain degree, it shows that politeness of of the Asian
yeah.
culture in general, that where people, you could see two, a man and a woman, they don't have to walk down the street with holding their hands. They don't have to be kissing on the street
That's right.
for them to
Yeah,
have a really great relationship.
that's right. That's right.
It's deeper
Yeah,
than the physical that we keep seeing.
yeah, yeah. And there's an innocence to that as well too.
Right.
It's almost more pure.
It is pure.
Yeah. But I mean, now we're talking about being innocent and pure, and this is a murderer, right? This is someone who's murdered people, and this is a detective who's covered up the crime. So I mean, you see the tension there, right? I mean, there is, the director said in an interview, he said he explicitly did not want to have visceral nudity and violence in the film. It was indirect. Everything was very
Right.
indirect.
Right.
And so there's this, it's intensely seductive, but
Right.
it's romantically pure. It's like it's inherently murderous, right? The whole thing is a
Yeah.
crime drama, but
Yeah.
it's delicate and it's childlike,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
that's
Very, very, very young love, teenage love, kind of.
yeah. But
Wow.
again, that's Korean identity though.
Right.
Like Koreans, they have, in some circles, they have this they have this reputation for having short tempers.
Mm.
Like they can get very angry very quick, but at the
Mhm.
same time, they're very polite and very
Mhm.
kind and very deferential. And so there's almost like these two sides of them. And most of the time, you don't see the anger. It takes a
Right.
lot to draw that anger publicly out of a
Out.
Korean person, right?
Mhm.
But if you push someone too far, anyone will, get to their limit. And so I think that's true for Koreans as well too. But most of the time, they suffer with the Han. Yeah,
Wow, this is an incredible. See, films are just incredible. Films
yeah,
are just incredible
yeah,
because when you sit down and you watch a movie and you think you've seen one thing, you talk to somebody else, they've seen five other things, and you talk to
yeah,
somebody else is probably going to see different things than we saw. It's just amazing and fascinating. I just
yeah.
love film because even the writer, I think there's some things that we might have picked up that the writer didn't even
True.
consider
That's true.
when doing it.
That's true. That's
It's
true.
mind blowing.
Yeah. And just, going back to that final scene, she is right below him at one point. Like he's standing
Yes.
on literally on top of her, you know?
I remember it. I remember that I could taste that scene in my mouth when it was happening. Just
And it's almost like he was physically with her without being with her,
without
you
being with her,
know?
without being
And
with her.
that is again Han as well too. Yeah, Han is about I might not have it in this lifetime,
Right.
but in some imagined future, or maybe in heaven, or maybe in another life,
Right.
there will be justice. I will be rewarded. Like there will be a future. And so again, when you think about the gospel message and the Korean people's Han is a very strong door that opens itself
Right.
to the Christian gospel. So if you
Right.
think about Han as being sacrifice
Mhm.
and commitment, right? It's all or nothing. It's not just I'm going to suffer a little bit and then I'm gonna have a good life. It's no, this is like a life of suffering, and I'm
Right.
willing to give up my life. So you look at her sacrifice, and it's almost like a messianic type of sacrifice,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
You know,
Carrying your cross.
yeah, in the Bible it says, Jesus says, I'm gonna leave, but
Mhm.
lo, I am with you even to the end of the age. It's sort of like that concept. She's always gonna be with them, even though
Yeah.
she's leaving, the sacrifice. Yeah,
Yes. Wow.
yeah.
Yes. Oh shoot.
So good stuff, right?
This is so cool. It's
Yeah,
so intriguing. It's because that narrative, that analysis works perfectly because Korea is 60% Christian. So
yeah.
it like fits right in. It fits right in.
Mm.
Wow. Great job, director. Great job.
Yeah, yeah, no, and I think I told you, I'm not sure if I told you actually, but my wife came out of that film. She's like, "Oh, that was the worst ever." That's what she said to me. And she's Korean American too, right? She's like, that was the worst film ever. That was so boring. And I didn't say anything to her. I was just like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, you know. But it's one of those films where you actually the conversation around the film really
Yeah.
does draw out the meaning. Like
The meaning. If we
if
didn't
you just
have this
walk away, I
conversation,
think
yeah.
you will miss so much. You'll miss
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah. And I found it watching it in a room. There was probably about 6, 7 people in
Yeah,
the theater
yeah,
that I was watching it
yeah,
when I was watching it. And I don't remember the scene, but I could hear a couple of laughter,
yeah,
from some of the people that were there. And I was like, okay, it's hitting, people getting it.
yeah,
And
yeah,
there was another lady, I don't know if she's European or not, but everybody else, they probably were Korean because they just looked Asian.
yeah.
Just the two of us, I'm sure they would look at me like, black lady, Korean film. But
No, they're like, you're one of us now,
now you're watching this, really? Yeah. So I'm like, it would be interesting to be like, so what did you think of the movie when I was leaving? But
Yeah,
I didn't check in with any of them.
yeah,
It was good. It was good to experience that. And on a normal day, maybe next time I would to watch such a movie, I would go to maybe like Chinatown, Koreatown, and
Yeah.
sit in the audience, because
Yeah.
I do that with African movies or Black movies.
Yeah.
I go to Crenshaw and I
Ah,
watch it at the theater, because it's not just about the movie,
that's right.
it's about the experience that I can feel from the audience and their reaction to scenes and things like that. I really enjoy that too.
Yeah. No, it's fun. It's fun being in a community and watching something together. And
Yeah.
and again, we have community here by
Yes,
even
yes,
having a dialogue about
yes.
this. which
You
is-
should let your wife watch this, and she'll be like, "Oh, it wasn't boring after all."
And it's okay. I think most people will say it's a very slow film, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. I think
And-
we are just the geeks of film, so we can feel the slowness, but we
Yeah.
can see how that slowness play into the overall
Yeah.
emotion that the film is driving.
Yeah. And I think also morally, I think for my wife, maybe even morally, it was difficult
Yeah.
for her because, again, this is a married man having an
Yes.
affair, right? I mean, falling in love with another woman. So that's
Yeah.
difficult to watch too because of that, I think. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Especially if you're from a very polite culture.
yeah,
Yeah,
conservative culture. Yeah, absolutely.
conservative culture at this point. Not more politeness, but conservative at this point. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. But to be honest, after seeing a Squad Game,
Uh-huh.
I was pleasantly happy, or I was happy that there wasn't too much. It was like people just dying left and right and blowing people's head off. And I was also happy that the sex scene came up quickly, but
Yeah.
also it wasn't overwhelmingly long or uncomfortable. So it came and it went.
Yeah.
And I asked myself, was it really necessary? But it kind of painted the point of these people seem very intimate, but during an intimate situation, he's thinking about a murder.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So he kind of set the ground
It did.
as to
It
how
did.
obsessed this man
That's
is.
right.
of his
That's right.
job.
That's right. I agree.
Yeah.
Well, let me stop
Yeah.
recording.
Overall, great
and then-
movie.